The 90s were truly the renaissance of the TV animation age. I know some people may disagree with me here, but Batman the Animated Series was the big bang of this revolution. Once that began to air, other amazing shows soon followed. Spider-Man the Animated Series, X-Men, just to name a few. But one of my favorite shows is one that I don't think gets enough attention, Gargoyles. This show was amazing. It had long, integrated storylines that would last entire seasons, deeply layered characters, incredible animation, excellent voice acting, and engaging stories. It was the show that I looked forward to every week. It was a mature animated series that didn't talk down to kids. It trusted us to be okay with characters getting hurt and even dying. It didn't try to shelter us from the dangers of life. And the fact that this was a Disney show still boggles my mind. So let's shake off the stones, spread our wings, and glide into the amazing story behind Gargoyles in this episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten. Gargoyles was created by Greg Weisman, although the show bears no creator credit. Even though many people cite Weisman as the sole creator, Weisman says he was actually a co-creator, since this was a group effort. At the time that Weisman was working at Disney, the Disney Afternoon was in full swing, a block of cartoons that pretty much defined the 1990s. Their mortal enemy was the programming over at Fox Kids Animation. Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney at the time, sent the order that he wanted a cartoon like the ones his kids liked. You're probably wondering right now, what was the cartoon that led to the creation of Gargoyles? Was it Batman? The X-Men? Spider-Man the Animated Series? Nope, actually it was
Gummy bears bouncing here and there and everywhere. High adventure that's beyond compare. They are the gummy bears.
Yes, I'm serious. Gargoyles was born because of the often ignored but excellent cartoon show, Adventures of the Gummy Bears. We may revisit the Gummy Bears series on a future episode, but to sum up my opinion of that show, it was an awesome cartoon, and deeper than you may think. But anyway, Weisman suddenly got an idea on what to base this show on. He said he loved gargoyles, ever since going on a trip to Europe back in high school. He was intrigued about the contradiction of seeing statues of creatures that were made to protect people from evil spirits on the roofs of cathedrals. He collected gargoyle postcards while in college at Oxford and would take pictures of them. So he thought gargoyles would be the perfect idea for a new show. At first, Weisman and his team came up with a more comedic version, but the show slowly went in the other direction after they saw the character designs. Greg Guler was the artist and character designer for Goliath and his former lover, Demona. Goliath was inspired from the character of the Chernabog in Fantasia, which also inspired elements of the design for Demona. However, her design took a little longer to pin down. Slowly but surely, Guler would take ideas from other people on how she should look. For example, producer Frank Parr told him to make her hair wilder, to create a more menacing look. Weisman said that the placement of the horns was key on these characters. The more forward-leaning the horns on a gargoyle were, the more it would indicate a menacing, evil look. While if you had the horns go the opposite direction, it would cause the characters to look more heroic. Another cool idea that Guler came up with was making the gargoyles' eyes turn white whenever they got angry, except for Demona, whose eyes would glow red. Another cool design of the gargoyles was when their wings would cause them to look like they were wearing capes. Weisman was hesitant to approve this choice at first, since he felt it looked too much like Batman, but moved forward with it anyway. And it turned out to be the right choice, since it helped the animation be more productive. Because animating a character with wings open all the time would have been a nightmare. You wouldn't have been able to get more than 2 characters on screen at the same time. Other artists began to help out with the show, such as Bob Klein designing the gargoyles' arch-enemy Xanatos, and Dave Schwartz designing the rest of the gargoyles. The show's original pitch was vastly different from what finally aired. For one thing, the main villain of the show was supposed to be a character called Xavier, a descendant of the wizard who cursed the gargoyles. He was a Captain Hook type of villain, who also had a sidekick called Mr. Owen, who was accidentally turned into a talking aardvark. Also, an early version of one of the gargoyles was named Lassie. He named himself after that iconic television dog because he admired Lassie for how heroically it was portrayed on that TV show. Once they presented the gargoyles idea to Michael Eisner, he looked at it and said no. So the team began to pack up their things when Wiseman's boss, Gary Chrysler, told Wiseman and the team to not give up and retool the show. From there, Wiseman slowly began to change the idea. At the time, the Disney afternoon tended to seem like the programming was more based in comedy and adventure. It was the 90s, so the big buzzword at the time was edgy. Disney needed an edgy show to be able to stand out on the Disney afternoon and appeal to a different audience. Jeffrey Katzenberg at the time had been told by Gary Chrysler that the Disney afternoon needed more variety, so the show began to take a more serious and dramatic tone. A lot of the comedy was ejected to focus more on the character relationships. Things like Demona and Goliath going from tragic lovers to hated enemies were introduced, and a gothic setting was established by the characters living in one of the most famous cities on Earth, New York City. Now, many people say that Batman the Animated Series had a huge influence on this show. I, for one, disagree, and I couldn't find any sources from Wiseman confirming this, although at the time Batman was a massive hit, so I can see why people would make this assumption. However, there is one concrete connection between Batman and Gargoyles. The first season was written by Steve Perry, Michael Reeves, and Bryn Chandler Reeves, who were all former Batman the Animated Series writers. Still, I think comparing Gargoyles to Batman is unfair, as they both had a different feel. Gargoyles was more mythological and Shakespearean, while Batman had a dark film noir feel to it. Still, many people continue to try and connect these two shows, so much so that in an interview the comparison was brought up to Bruce Timm, who annoyingly said, "Yeah, that whole premise of Gargoyles was kind of namby-pamby anyway, with all that Celtic fantasy crap." I hope Bruce was just having a bad day when he said that, because had he watched the show, he would see that characters from mythology and Shakespeare would appear in the series. This is because Wiseman was a former English teacher, and felt it would be a great way to introduce these Shakespearean themes to a new generation. And it worked, because many fans cite their love of the Bard because of their love for Gargoyles. It wasn't just themes. Characters like Puck and Oberon appeared on the series. One of my favorite characters was the evil King Macbeth, whose connection with Demona was most fascinating. One of the greatest aspects of the show was the voice cast. Is it me, or did the 90s just explode with amazing voice acting? Maybe it was because I grew up in this era, but this was the time I began to pick up on who the voices were behind the characters that I loved. Every episode of Gargoyles just had stellar performances. Not only did it have legends like Jim Cummings and Frank Welker, but voiceover stars who would become huge later in their career, like Bill Fagerbakke. The show also featured incredible performances from the likes of John Rhys Davies, Matt Frewer, and even Tony freaking Shalhoub. His episode was one of my favorites of the show, where Shalhoub plays a grieving father trying to force the Egyptian god of death, Anubis, to bring his son back to life. I think the reason I remember it is because it had a great moral lesson on how you have to accept death. The name of the episode is called Grief, and I highly recommend you should check it out. But there were 4 voices in particular that made the show what it was. First off, we have our badass cop and Goliath's love interest, Detective Elisa Mazza, voiced by Sally Richardson Whitfield. I've talked about Richardson previously in our Eureka episode, and she played Elisa not only as a badass, but also as a guide to Goliath and the rest of his clan. Another aspect of the show that was often featured was bigotry. Many episodes would show how the humans persecuted Gargoyles. In the pilot episode, even after the Gargoyles defend the castle from Vikings, they are still shunned by the humans. The great Jonathan Frakes played the arch-enemy of the Gargoyles, David Xanatos. Xanatos was ruthless, cunning, and charming, and Frakes was incredible in the part. His voice just oozed confidence. It's funny that Frakes was the #1 choice for the part, but he almost didn't get the role. While recording an episode for the network to review, production had begun to fall behind, so they went to a different recording studio during the weekend. The owner of the studio let them in, but forgot to turn on the AC. So Frakes and the others were dying of heat, and could barely get out their lines. Thus they called the owner back to the studio. He came back furious that he had to waste his weekend driving back. So when he arrived, he turned on the AC all the way up, meaning that Frakes and his castmates were freezing. Then he had to come back a 3rd time and fix it properly. It goes without saying that the resulting recordings were horrible, but even though they explained the situation to them, the network didn't buy it, and they didn't want to hire Frakes. They wound up going through 3 other people before the network finally relented. And that was how one stupid mistake almost cost us one of the coolest villains in cartoon history. Frakes' co-star on Star Trek The Next Generation, Marina Sirtis, was also cast as one of the first most complex villains in a cartoon, Demona. Demona was Goliath's former mate and second in command, who let her selfishness and anger lead her to make a horrible mistake. A mistake so horrible that it led to the death of most of her clan. Throughout the ages, her hatred of humans has only grown. By the time she meets Goliath and the other gargoyles in present day, she has become one of their greatest enemies. If it wasn't for Marina, I don't think this character would resonate with fans today. Sirtis was electrifying. Her voice brought so much depth. She could convey anger, regret, bitterness, and vulnerability so easily. The show also featured many other Star Trek actors: Brent Spiner, Avery Brooks, Cole Meany, LeVar Burton, Kate Mulgrew, and Nichelle Nichols, just to name a few. The Star Trek connection began when Wiseman and voice director Jamie Thomason tried to think of someone who they could cast as Goliath's brother, Coldstone. But who could they cast to play a character with that much power in their voice? They looked across the room as Frakes and Sirtis were recording a scene together, and thought to themselves, what about Worf himself, Michael Dorn? It just snowballed from there. Whenever they needed someone to cast for a character, they just went after Star Trek actors. They all had great chemistry, and it was a great gig for the actors. Sadly, one of the most memorable Star Trek Next Generation actors who was not on the show was Sir Patrick Stewart. It just never panned out, but one of the voices he was considered for was for the leading man of the show, Goliath. Another notable actor who read for the role was Clancy Brown, who went so method that he scared the crap out of voice director Jamie Thomason.
He started the audition, and he was Goliath, and so he was staring through the glass at me, and I gave him some notes, and he was just staring at me, and I thought, oh my God, this guy's going to leap through the glass and kill me. I didn't know what was up other than he hated me. And then we completed the audition. He was really good. and then he was just like, he smiled. Hey, thanks. That was fun. And I thought, wait, what? What happened to the serial killer a second ago? He was just so in character.
But the man they cast to play the heroic Goliath has one of the coolest voices in the world, Keith David. David is an amazing actor who has been acting for decades. One of his most memorable roles was in John Carpenter's The Thing. My personal favorite character of his was Frank Armitage in Carpenter's cult classic movie They Live. David blew everyone away with his performance. After all these years, I cannot picture anyone else ever playing Goliath. And he's since gone on to portray some memorable characters in voice work, such as the President in Rick and Morty, Mongol in Young Justice, and my personal favorite role of his, Lieutenant Colonel Al Simmons, aka Spawn. Another actor that I have to mention portrayed the elder of the Gargoyles, Hudson, voiced by the late, great Ed Asner. The role of Hudson was specifically created for Ed Asner, and to try and sum up his incredible career in one episode of Gone But Not Forgotten would just be dumb. The man was a national treasure, and not only did he have legendary roles in film and TV, but he also voiced iconic characters such as J. Jonah Jameson, Granny Goodness, and so many more. We truly lost a legend and an amazing human being when Asner sadly passed away in 2021. So the creators wound up pitching the show multiple times to Michael Eisner, but he finally gave the go-ahead, and on October 24th, 1994, Gargoyles rose out of stone and took off into the sky. All to the tune of that badass opening theme by Carl Johnson. From the start, the show was a hit, and immediately began to grow a strong fan base. The stories were action-packed, full of complex characters, and fascinating plots. Many stories pushed some boundaries of what most animated shows at the time were doing. There were some subplots that took multiple episodes to pay off characters' backstories, and motivations were expanded over the course of a season. Hell, some people got maimed, and even killed. Wiseman and the team were lucky that not only did they have the backing of Eisner and other executives at Disney behind them, but they also had Adrienne Bello, an executive in charge of broadcast standards and practices in their corner. She loved the show and helped them not get censored as much as they would have. There were things that were unavoidable. People couldn't get stabbed because they didn't want kids trying to use knives at home. Xanatos and his future wife, Fox, had to be shown sleeping in separate bedrooms before they were married. Most of the complaints they got were of parents saying that the show was demonic because of the way that the gargoyles looked. Yeah, pretty silly stuff. There was only one instance in my research of the show getting censored that I could find. In the season 1 episode called Deadly Force, one of the gargoyles, Broadway, is visiting Elisa when he sees her gun and begins to play with it. It goes off and Elisa gets shot. This episode was clearly about gun safety and how you should never play with guns. Pretty important lesson to teach kids, right? Parental groups didn't think so, and after some complaints, Disney pulled the episode from rotation. Eventually they let it be on reruns, but with some heavy editing. At the end of the first season, the network asked Weisman to make more episodes, and he agreed, but was shocked when they asked for a whopping 52 episodes. And I was very surprised after rewatching the show that the majority of episodes from season 2 are very good. Considering how many they had to make, it's incredible that there weren't that many episodes which were just plain duds. Some of my favorite episodes include The Mirror, a story about the mischievous Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream. The famous fairy is freed from his imprisonment in a magic mirror by Demona, who makes wishes against the humans of New York City that Puck uses as an opportunity to play one of his famous pranks. Suddenly, humans are gargoyles, and gargoyles are humans. I think I like it so much not because it's a fun story, but also because of the animation. I couldn't find the name of the studio who animated this episode, but I love their style. It was fluid and had some cool visuals. I'm pretty sure this same team also handled my other favorite episode, Future Tense, which had a Days of Future Past vibe. In Future Tense, Goliath is thrown into a possible future that has left Xanatos ruling the city with an iron fist. It was epic, and I was very impressed with all they were able to do within just one episode. Of course, we also have the 2-part episode, The Gathering, where multiple subplots and reveals occurred, which were set up from the start of Season 1. It was amazing to see Oberon going up against Xanatos and the Gargoyle clan. I think one of the best series of episodes was the massive 4-part episode story, City of Stone, which fully fleshed out Demona, as well as Macbeth, another antagonist of the show's history. Speaking of antagonists, the show had plenty of memorable ones, such as Theolog, the evil clone of Goliath, the Archmage, and the supervillain team known as the Pack, probably the only other villains that had as much encounters with the Gargoyles as Xanatos did. They were voiced by multiple veteran voice actors, such as Cree Summer and Jim Cummings. As for the rest of the Gargoyle clan, we had the goofy Broadway, who was voiced by Bill Fagerbakke. Fagerbakke is famous for 2 roles in particular, Dauber Dubinsky from the classic sitcom Coach, as well as...
Remember, Patrick, flatter the customer. Make him feel good.
Hello? I love you.
Yes, that famous starfish was also the voice of one of the goofiest gargoyles. The second most popular gargoyle of the clan was Brooklyn, voiced by Jeff Bennett, a prolific voice actor who has done dozens of credits in animation, anime, and video games. It's amazing to see this guy cycling through different voices.
Bike. Isn't that a cool bike?
Yes, it is a very cool bike. Unfortunately, we're going to have to blow it up. I'm so sorry, Brooklyn.
Yes, but before you blow it up, I'd like to change it into a beautiful woman.
Such an amazing talent. But my personal favorite character was Lexington, voiced by Tom Adcox Hernandez. One of his most recent roles was as Clarion the Witch Boy on Young Justice. I think I liked Lexington so much because of his design. He looks sort of like a mix of a flying squirrel with a bat. I was obsessed with flying squirrels as a kid, so it makes sense that he was my favorite character. As the second season went on, the show expanded on the Gargoyle universe. Yes, new settings were introduced on top of new mythology, but I dug little things, like the fact that the Gargoyles originally didn't have names. It was actually Elisa who had named them after New York boroughs, such as the Bronx and Brooklyn. Hudson was named after the river, Lexington and Broadway were named from the famous streets and landmarks. They also didn't have a family structure. The most famous example was when Goliath meets his biological daughter, Angela, whom he told to consider the entire clan as her family. A backdoor pilot was made with the episode called The New Olympians, but by that time many executives that were champions of the show had left their positions, so a lot of that protection began to fade, and plans of making a larger Gargoyles universe with spin-off shows fizzled out. Toward the end of the second season, things really began to sour. What killed Gargoyles is so complex that it would take another episode to go over it, but there are two big key things that led to its fall. Even though Gargoyles did well in the ratings, they weren't high enough for Disney. And why is that? Because they wanted it to beat the ratings for... Yep, Power Rangers was one of the death nails in Gargoyles' coffin. In my opinion, it's a bit unfair that someone would have the arrogance to think that an animated show could dominate over a live-action adventure show. Power Rangers could be cranked out at a rapid pace. It used footage that had been filmed years prior in Japan, while Gargoyles was an animated series that required overseas studios, voice acting, and detailed scripts. The other nail was the third season of the show, also known as the Goliath Chronicles. I honestly never saw any episodes past season 2, so it's unfair of me to say that it sucked. However, every fan that I have met despises the Goliath Chronicles, and many don't even consider it to be canon. So take of that what you will. Many story elements from the previous seasons were ignored or written out of the universe, and the quality really dropped when Wiseman was essentially demoted. He wasn't allowed to produce Chronicles, and thus no longer had creative control. Plus, he said that the work schedule he was given was impossible for him, so he was given the position of consultant. The next showrunner that they got had both creative control and a normal schedule, and while Wiseman's ideas and advice were followed sometimes, they were often ignored or the opposite was done. So in a decision that he says he now regrets, he quit the show. After the 13 episodes of Goliath Chronicles aired, the ratings had tanked, and the Gargoyles took one last flight into the night. So should this show come back? It seems like a no-brainer to me. In a sense, the show has continued, with Wiseman writing comics that adapt his show ideas. He's had conversations with Disney, but it's pretty much in limbo at this point. According to him, if the show stands any chance of ever coming back, there is only one thing that will make it happen. Money. At the end of the day, this is a business. It's sad to say that, but it's true. So if you folks out there want Gargoyles to come back, then promote the show however you can, as it's currently streaming on Disney+. Bump up the number of views on that streaming service, sign up to Disney Plus to raise their subscriber base, and hell, buy yourself some merchandise. Hopefully someone higher up will get the message and give it the green light. Either way, the show still holds up after all these years later. If you folks out there haven't seen it, I highly suggest that you do. But you should do it during the daylight though. Maybe you'll get lucky one night and see some figures gliding in the sky, knowing that the Gargoyles will indeed live again! I'm Jesse Shade speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for Joblo.com, and thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our Joblo Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we will see you next time for the next installment of Gone, But Not Forgotten.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. Joblo remains an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.